Welcome to the video on part 4 of Unit 2, Proving Angle Relationships. So just like we had the segment addition postulate that said part plus part of segment equals the whole segment, we have the angle addition postulate, which says that if you have an angle and then you have a ray that divides it into two angles, that part plus part equals the whole thing. So once again, angle addition postulate is part plus part equals the whole thing. So if you look at the picture here, and it says find the measure of angle 1, we'll put that as x. If measure of angle 2 is equal to 58, and the whole thing is equal to 162. So we can set up an equation, because what we do know is we know the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is equal to the whole thing, which is the measure of angle JKL. So therefore, we know that it's x plus 58 degrees equals 162 degrees. And then you subtract. So 162 minus 58, the measure of angle 1 is equal to 104 degrees. There you go. There's also what's called the supplement theorem. If two angles form a linear pair, they are supplementary angles, which means when you add them together, they equal to 180. The complement theorem is if you have the non-common sides of two adjacent angles form a right angle, right? So if angle 1 plus angle 2 equals 90, then the angles are complementary, which means they add to 90. So here it says at 4 o'clock, the angle between the hour and minute hands is 120 degrees. So at 4 o'clock, it's 120 degrees. When the second hand bisects the angle, so that means that these two parts are congruent, what are the measures of the angles between the minute and second hands and between the second and hour? Well, if it's 120 the whole thing, and you divide it in half, that means it has to be 60 degrees and 60 degrees. So that means those two are both 60 degrees. Number 3, if the diagram shows one square for a particular quilt pattern, if the measure of angle BAC equals DAE, so BAC and DAE are the same, and they're both 20 degrees, and BAE is a right angle, so this whole thing is a right angle, find the measure of angle CAD. So we'll say that's x. So we know that x plus 40, because it's 20 plus 20, equals 90 degrees. So that means x equals 50 degrees. So the measure of angle CAD is equal to 50 degrees. So the next question says angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair. So remember, linear pair means that if they form a linear pair, the angle 1 plus angle 2 equals 180. Find the measure of angle 1 and angle 2 if angle 1 is 8x plus 18 and angle 2 is 16x plus 6, minus 6. So when you add them up, they equal to 180. So add common terms, 24x plus 12, and then you subtract 12, so 24x equals 168, and then divide by 24, and you get x equals 7. So the measure of angle 1 is equal to 8 times 7 plus 18, which is 74 degrees. And the measure of angle 2 is 16 times 7 minus 6, which is 106 degrees. So now for angle 5, notice it adds up to a right angle. So measure angle 1 plus measure angle 2 equals 90. Angle 1 is x plus 54. Angle 2 is 2x. They add up to 90, so 3x plus 54 equals 90. 3x equals, you subtract 54, and you get 36. You divide by 3, and you get x equals 12. So the measure of angle 1 equals 12 plus 54, which is 66. And the measure of angle 2 is 2 times 12, which is 24 degrees. All right, so some properties of congruence with angles. The reflexive property works. The same angle is congruent to itself. Same with the symmetric property and the transit property. So they all three apply to angle congruence as well. Some new vocabulary. We talked about vertical angles. When they're formed by opposite rays, right? They're opposite angles. And remember, one thing that you're going to notice, like if you have angle 1 is, let's say 30, and notice this is a line, so angle 2 is 150. So that means angle 3 is 30, and 4 is 150. So notice vertical angles are going to be congruent because they have the same measure. So anytime you have vertical angles, you can say that they are congruent. So if angle A and angle Z are vertical angles, that means angle A is congruent to angle Z, which means the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle Z, which means that 3b minus 23 is equal to 152 minus 4b. So we add the 4b, so we get 7b. We add the 23, which gives us 175, and divide by 7, and you get b equals 25. And then define the measure of angle A. It is 3 times 25 minus 23. So it's 75 minus 23, which is equal to 52 degrees, which is also the measure of angle Z since they are equal. They are both equal to 52. All right, so some more theorems with regards to angles. If two angles are supplementary to the same angle, so for example, angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2. So let's say that angle 1 is 100 and angle 2 is 80 degrees. So that means that, and then angle 2 is supplementary to angle 3. So if these two are supplementary, that means that has to be 100. So notice angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent because they are both supplementary to the same angle. And the same thing could be said for complementary. If 4 and 5 are complementary, let's say 4 is 20 and 5 is 70, and 6 and 5 are complementary, so that means 6 has to be 20, so that means 4 and 6 are congruent because they are both complementary to 5. There are also some right angle theorems. So if perpendicular lines intersect to form 4 right angles. So if two lines are perpendicular, they form 4 right angles. All right angles are congruent because all right angles equal 90 degrees. So if you have two right angles, you know that they are congruent because they have the same measure. And then perpendicular lines form congruent adjacent angles because they form four right angles, and all angles are congruent. All right angles are congruent. If two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each angle is a right angle, because if they add up to 180, and notice one's 90, then the other one has to be 90. So if they're supplementary and congruent, that means they're both right angles. If two congruent angles form a linear pair, then they are right angles, right? Because if they add to 180 and they're congruent, then they have to be 90 and 90. All right, so that concludes our video for today on the angle relationships. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask during class. Have a good rest of your evening.